Good morning. I chose Elink as my curation tool, and I'm going to go through how I created it. So this is my final page that I'm going to go over here in a second. Let me first start by describing the area of instruction that I will be using this for. In my literature class, I have 8th graders. It's a nonfiction unit. We watch a Virunga documentary, which is a really cool story. Kids really get into it, and it's pretty moving. And so that engaging them that way is not all that difficult. So this would act as kind of an introduction activity where they'd be finding a bunch of information, just like we discovered on our podcast over here. Jennifer Gonzalez talked about how accessing the information or actually finding it. Let me see if I can find it here. Where a collection of resources itself is a standalone tool. So that was the goal, to create an assignment where the collection of resources is the assignment. Okay, let me go back here. This is what my final project looks like. I believe there's 9 different sources here. Okay, so again, to describe more of the area of instruction, this will be in my literature class. This is the standard I will be using, ELA Literacy Standard. Reading from Information 8.3, it says, analyze how a text makes connections among and distinctions between individuals, ideas, or events. For example, through comparisons, analogies, or categories. And then also on Jennifer Gonzalez's podcast, she describes analyzing, Bloom's taxonomy of higher order thinking. She describes analyzing as where we distinguish relevant from irrelevant information and to organize it in a way that makes sense. So I had those 2 central standards or objectives set out before I started, and the same thing will hold true for students. Okay, so the objective will be for students to gather resources that include information on your assigned group and analyze your group, the role your group has played in the conflict from 2014 to present day. I narrowed the scope just a little bit because you could date it back all the way from 1925 to 2014, the conflict that's going on in Virunga. So I wanted to limit it a little bit so that it wasn't quite an extensive project. But this is within Virunga National Park in the Democratic Republic of the Congo and in the surrounding areas by Virunga National Park. So I had to limit it a little bit, talking about when, 2014 present day, and where. I'm not going to talk about the entire history of the Congo. It dates back, like I said, you could go back all the way to its origination, and we don't want to get into that much history in an 8th grade literature class. So the groups that I'm going to give them to organize themselves in, I will assign these groups. They will either take on the point of view as a militant group, or from SOCO International, or International Community, or the Citizens of the Congo, which I'm going to get rid of this part. Now these parts, they are point of views, but it's more of a way of organizing their information. Because there's so much information out there, I'm going to have them, like I stated in the objective, gather resources as if they were in that group. So with that topic. So I kind of explain it a little bit better here. I say that our students are going to collect resources of various modes, so videos, articles, interviews, with content relating to your group. So for example, if I am in the SOCO group, which is what I did on my example, I will need to find resources to discuss SOCO's role in the conflict. So I'm not arguing necessarily, I'm just evaluating information that has to do with SOCO's role. If my group is the Citizens of the Congo, I will need to find resources relating to Congolese citizens, or that have information specific to them, or interviews with Congolese citizens. But that's how I kind of narrowed it down, and how I'm going to organize groups, so that when we're done with this, students from each group can share their group's perspective or information relating to them, and we can kind of evaluate how that point of view changes their intake of the information. And lastly, they're going to analyze each source with these guiding questions in mind. I tried to keep it fairly simple because, as I stated before, there's a ton of information from many, many different sources. having to do with lots of different people groups. So this could be a project that could take weeks if we evaluated everything, or if we analyzed everything having to do with the conflict in the Congo. But I narrowed it down to these 5 questions. What is the conflict? Who is involved? When did it start? And has it ended? Where is the conflict taking place? And why is there conflict? So as I stated before, this is going to be a collection activity where they're gathering information. So this is inquiry-based. Where in the future, after this collection, they'll have the future objective of delineating and evaluating the argument and specific claims in a text, assessing whether the reasoning is sound and the evidence is relevant and sufficient, and recognizing when irrelevant evidence is introduced. So after they make their Elink page and we discuss it, they will have another activity where we will actually go through and pretty much and get to the point of where we argue and evaluate whose point of view we agree with, we don't agree with, and we can share ideas in that way. So then the delineation and evaluation part of it includes the conflict in Virunga National Park, which involves many groups, all with different perspectives. And they're going to evaluate their group's statements and actions in comparison to the rest of the class, the other groups. So they would be comparing the SOCO group would be comparing what SOCO's actions were compared to and the impact it had on the international community, the other militant groups, and the citizens of the Congo. Okay, back to my Elink page. And as you can see, I am combining disciplines here. So I'm trying to integrate social studies in my literacy discipline or class. And it offers me an opportunity to use technology literacy skills like retrieval and processing and organizing of data and design, just like it was described in Chapter 4 of our text in literacy and new technology. And what I'm essentially doing here is forming a nonfiction narrative with use of, I believe I have 9 different sources in a variety of modes that each offer different information, and they're presented in a different way. And it provides an opportunity for students to categorize their work and compare it to the other groups. So as I said, it's a digital narrative, more or less, nonfiction narrative. And it's much like the digital storytelling we learned about in Digital Storytelling, revisited by Caffey and Jenkins in 2014. And at the beginning of that chapter, it says that people of all ages routinely integrate new media forms, such as YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, into a single narrative or media collage, such as a website, blog, or digital story. And that's Kohler 2009, page 31. And Common Core state standards emphasize students' ability to create both print and non-print text through integration of traditional and new literacy practices, and that's Dalton 2012. And also, according to Bloom's taxonomy, creating is essential outcome of learning. So really we're doing all of that in this collection of sources that's forming a narrative. And also, much like digital storytelling, students are learning to research, develop point of view, because we're talking about these different groups and organizing our thoughts or organizing our information based off of our group's point of view or perspective. And we're creating an emotional connection to the content. And once we start looking into the actual content, you'll realize that it's some pretty intense stuff, and students have always connected. In the 3 years I've taught it, have really connected to it. And actually, they've been a little disturbed by it to the point where they feel like getting involved. This opportunity provides insights into students' experiences and the community they live in and their lives. When they start forming and finding these websites, they're choosing which ones are most relevant to them and which ones are most important to them. So I chose which ones were most meaningful to me, but students also have this fund of knowledge that they may choose something else that will represent their understanding that I'm not aware of. So that gives me an opportunity to learn what they're interested in, what they find to be critical or important. And as I've already alluded to, this is meaningful for students because similar to what Hicks says in his 2013 No Longer a Luxury in the English Journal, he says countless curricular documents, blue ribbon panel reports, professional books, and conference presentations over the last decade have centered on the idea of teaching students how to be literate across multiple forms of media in a variety of contexts. So this is one context, social studies context, but it's also allowing them to use multiple forms of media. And one thing I wanted to make sure I did when I created this project is I didn't want to limit them to a certain number of sources they could use. So as you can see, I have 9, but I'm not going to give students a number. I'm going to give them an end goal, which I think is important, of making sure that they answer those 6 questions. So the who, what, when, where, why, in order to get a full idea of their group's perspective and the conflict itself in Virunga. Okay, when I went to make my Elink page, I had those 6 questions in mind. So my goal was to create a narrative, a nonfiction narrative, having to do with SoCo that answered those 6 questions. That was my goal, and that's what I'm going to try to explain to students depending on their group. Okay, so I added links, and the one thing that I found to be pretty challenging was the organization of the panels over here, so my links. So for example, I can click on this one, I'm going to go to edit, and it gives me an option to put a tag on it. And what I did, and I found it fairly effective, was to put 3 questions that I felt this source answered. So after reading it, I could answer those 3 questions. So, and I included the first one as kind of a background because I would think students would click on this first. It's the first one listed. So I want this to provide background. I don't necessarily want to provide all the specific information right off the bat. I want to provide some background information. So that was some thought process, some critical thinking on my end that I had to do, and students will have to do in order to organize their information so that their audience knows what's going on. And I can talk about the specifics of the other panels later, but this one provides some good background. So then I put this filled in automatically for me. This is the title of the article or the source. And then down here, I created this little summary. You could call it your annotation or your placard, but this is kind of a little summary on what this article does. So it says, Emmanuel Desmarais gives us background on the conflict in Virunga National Park, located by Lake Edward in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. He explains oil companies, most notably SoCo, have maneuvered illegally to prospect and drill for oil in the protected area. Several million rural people survive by farming crops on some of the most fertile soil in Africa or by fishing in the 2,300 square kilometer Lake Edward. So you can see that this answered what is the conflict. There's a conflict with SoCo, which is this oil company, and the national park where they're trying to drill for oil. And the national park is not having any of it. So it briefly explains the conflict. Where is the conflict? Virunga National Park and Democratic Republic of Congo, and who is involved. It gives you a couple of people involved, which is Emmanuel Desmarais and SoCo, this oil company. So I'll click Save. I'll move on to my next tile. So this next one, I chose to answer the question, who is involved? And I put another placard down here. The article shares the reaction of SoCo supporters as they became aware of the accusations of bribery and intimidation by SoCo employees. That's one of the reasons why I love this unit, is because there's some people that make some poor decisions, and there's a lot of bribery, and there's a lot of things that are going on behind the scenes that students really have to think critically and evaluate who is providing the information. So if you're reading something about Captain Ferruzzi, who it says, or Major Ferruzzi down here, who was secretly filmed trying to bribe a park warden, students have to realize that he's not the best source, and they have to take into account what he's doing. So they really have to think critically. And this source here, this webpage, gives some information on how a watchdog corporation, or a global witness, an anti-corruption watchdog, produced checks proving that SoCo paid at least $42,500 to Major Ferruzzi, a Congolese officer in charge of SoCo security, in the spring of last year. So SoCo knew that Major Ferruzzi had been secretly filmed trying to bribe a park warden, and his soldiers were silencing its opponents. Okay, I'm not going to go through all these because it might take quite a bit of time, but the next one says Soko paid Congo major accused of Virunga oil intimidation. This provides more information about the payoff of the people around Virunga National Park so that Soko could get into the park. Then there's this other resource from WWF, which is the World Wildlife Federation. I'll click on this one. So this answers the question, why is there conflict? So that's kind of the bigger question involved. But as I said, the World Wildlife Federation condemned all activities in Virunga National Park, which is a protected World Heritage Site. They outline the specific threats such action poses to wildlife locals and share statements from other members of the international community against Soko's exploration of the park. So this forms a source that provides the perspective of people who are not a fan of Soko, and they're strongly against it, and they believe they're acting illegally. The next link is a video. It says DR Congo, Soko halts oil exploration in Virunga Park in France. And I thought it was important to note that in our text, multimodal texts, what they are and how children use them, Bernie 2005, he mentions that children implicitly know you can combine pics, text, and video to get the message across. And I thought that was really important to include a video in my example because kids will understand that they can use video, they can use timelines, they can use interviews like our first one with Emmanuel Desmarode, all to form the same message. So let's take a look at this video real fast. We're not going to watch it. But this placard says that this video from a French news outlet shares an interview with the chairman of the World Wildlife Fund. He gives a synopsis of Soko's involvement in the park and the reasoning behind their eventual departure. So you can see that this also answers 3 questions. Who is involved? Where is conflict taking place? When did it start? And has it ended? So by putting those tags there, students are going to have to constantly refer back to their objective so that their thinking will be focused, their organization will be focused on how to answer those questions, which I think will really help them not only understand all of the information expressed, but will also help them eventually evaluate it. Then we have a timeline. Oops, sorry. Let me get back to where I am. I have a timeline here. This source I was really glad I found. It's very extensive. I did it again. It's very extensive. And it dates back to 1925 all the way up until present day. Oh, I will open it up for a second. I'll show you. Sorry, not present day, but up until 2013. So the last update of Virunga oil blocks, of the oil block. What I do like about this, though, is that it does mention Soko, but it also takes in a lot of information about the other members. So students will have a lot of background as far as other perspectives involved in the project. Okay, and then we'll move on to Soko giving up the oil license in protected DRC park. This is another article that is more of a modern update of what's going on there. This gives another perspective. So it talks about Congolese activists who were honored in fighting Soko. So taking that in as a part of the perspective as well. And then lastly, this is probably my favorite link that I think students should spend a decent amount of time on. It answers who is involved and then why is there conflict. This source says that a conflict in Virunga National Park was started when Soko sought out the possibility of oil exploration and later begun such exploration. In order to differentiate and evaluate stances on the conflict, this source breaks down what Soko has said in light of local and international outcry. So these are summaries that I created that were really difficult to make because you're taking in a ton of information and having to summarize after you evaluate the source for credibility and pair it with all of the other information on this kind of narrative that I said. So you have to organize it in sequence, and you have to make sure that it adds a component to answer those 6 questions that I stated before. And if we go back to the requirements that I set out, we're distinguishing relevant from irrelevant information and organizing it in a way that makes sense. So the way I'm organizing it is by question, and students will do the same. They will organize it so that it answers those 6 questions, but also keeping in mind that we want to start with background information and get a little bit more specific. So I know I'm going long here, so I'll click on this real quick and just show you the format. It's also timeline based, but what it does is it has a little blurb about background information, and then this highlighted portion is everything that SoCo has. This blurb is what SoCo has stated, and then everything else is the opposing viewpoint. So this has SoCo is committed to dialogue with stakeholders who have an interest or will be impacted by their operations. And then it says this is the community's fears and concerns about oil development. So students will get a great look at perspective from that source. So I realize this is very high-level thinking, and it's a lot to ask out of 8th graders, but I think with their interest in not only the content, but in how they're representing their information using Elink, I think they'll be able to do it. It does say there's in our text again, let me flip back, in multimodal text, Byrne 2005, or Bernie, sorry, 2005, what multimodal texts are and how children use them. He says that there's further complexity involved in reading whole texts that are multimodally presented, so that's adding another level of text complexity. And then specifically with image, relating to the difference between print and image. With images, on page 21 it says, the color, shape, placement, and verbal cohesion are a huge component. You just don't have that in text. So the critical analysis beyond image and text, which you see here, the summaries that you're providing and seeing, the sources and pictures and videos. You're looking at development of vocabulary to describe and evaluate meaning created by relationships between images, words, and you're creating a map basically where you have to follow from source or from link to link and eventually synthesize all this information together to form one understanding and one understanding, so then you can evaluate and discuss it with the other groups that we talked about. It would be very interesting to see how students choose their articles and their videos to answer those 6 questions. But one thing that I do not doubt is that there's plenty of information on this topic, on the conflict in the Congo. And I thought it was kind of neat that I could make this heading up here. And I'll also have them, when they go to publish it, I'll have them add a tag so that they can search for it on their dashboard that says Virunga Curation Project. And this is going to be I'm really excited about including this in my curriculum, this project, where they will use this as an opportunity to find as much information as they can to begin with based off of their choice, their interest, and their perspective.